Welcome, everyone. So grateful and happy and pleased that you're here. Honored to have you with us today. Of course, our guest of honor today is Pipilotti. She and her fantastic team has been more or less living in the forest for months. And I have a feeling that they're going to find it hard to go inside and start working inside after this experience. It's something very magical with the forest. To start out this little talk where we're going to focus on public art, I think we should take the Ekebergpark itself as a starting point. We are very fortunate today and have a great panel with us. I will start introducing at the end Laure Prouvost. Many of you know her from the magical, fantastic exhibition she did at the National Museum a little while ago. And some of you might have seen her fantastic pavilion at the Venice Biennial some years ago too, which is really one of my first encounters. I had to sneak by the entire queue because it was the day I was leaving, and it was so crowded every day. I think everyone had a must to see that pavilion. So I found a way, and I'm so glad I got to see it. It was just superb. So Laure is an artist that we have invited to come to the park and see if she can create a site-specific work for us. So we'll get more into that. Thomas J. Price is a very new encounter for me, at least in person. We spoke briefly on the phone, first time yesterday. But I had the privilege of stumbling upon one of his fantastic sculptures a few years ago in Menorca. Wasn't expected at all. But suddenly there was this girl standing in the middle of a field, and she was tall. She was in bronze, dark patina, and she was on her phone. And she was just so capturing. I just couldn't take my eyes off her. So I kept walking around and from a distance and whatever and all this. And then very enthusiastic, I sent a word back to the park and I said, I think she needs to come to Ekeberg. I think we need to have her here. So that's one of the reasons why he's here. And we will hopefully see that sculpture in the park next year.
Right.
And then we have Åsmund Thorkildsen, who many of you know from before. Eminent art historian, museum director for many years. And we've had the privilege of having him on our art committee in the park for quite a few years. So he's one of the decision makers. And we're very happy to have you here today with us. Then on the left, my left, we have Sam Keller of Fondation Beyeler, a long-term friend and the director of perhaps the most beautiful museum in the world. And he's done great work there for many years. You've been to the park quite a few times before, looked at various works that we have. We might have something in common as well in terms of artists. So very warm welcome to you and very happy to have you.
Great pleasure, thank you.
And some of you were here in the park in October of 22 when we inaugurated the first work by Pipilotti, the wonderful and mesmerizing hip lights, the 150 pairs of underwear hanging on a string up in the trees. For those of you who haven't seen them, please go and make today an opportunity to go and see them and experience them. Anyway, so let's get back to the beginning. The city of Oslo started to buy this land, this beautiful land where we are, back in the 1880s. It was the first time that Norway, the authorities of Norway, went in and said, okay, the city is going to create a park for the public. The king had created a park at Bygde in 1837, but now was the time for the East End the sunny side, we have the afternoon sun, to have a park, recreational space. They actually said that we need a park for the social, moral, and health well-being of the public, of our citizens. So that was the ambition. So as of 1880, people started to wander here and use it as a park. In the early 1900s, we had the first restaurant, then we had a second restaurant, the one which is still there, and then we had a music pavilion. And the public used it, and it was a very, very sought-after place, and the city looked after it very fantastically for many, many years. And then we came into the early 2000s, and maybe the status of the park wasn't that great. But then we had Christian Ringnes, who took on the job, the encouragement from some friends, and he bought the Ekeberg restaurant and put it back to splendor, restored it. It was very, very much in decay, looked horrible. I don't know what happened to it, but he came in, took it on as a project, and in 2005 it opened to the public and has been a success ever since. Thankfully, he's a very dedicated guy, so he would go up and see how the whole work was going on, and he would spend a lot of time walking in the park. He went to the city and he said, I think that beautiful forest could look a little bit better than it does today. So maybe we could make a collaboration. Maybe I could put up a foundation and I could help fund it. We have to redo the pathways, maybe with some more light bulbs, maybe some trash cans, maybe remove some of the graffiti. And there's a lot of things we could do to beautify the area itself. And maybe we could make it into a sculpture park. Maybe that would draw more audience. Maybe we should have an open-air museum and have a dialogue between the forest, the landscape, and the artworks, and then a communication with the public. So that's what we've been doing since 2013 when we opened. Today we're going to unveil the 46th work of the park, the most magical work, the Nordic pixel forest. And so the journey has been fantastic in all ways, in all manners, but it's, what do you do? I mean, you take over a park, and what do you do? How do you make it into an open-air museum? What are you creating? What are you facilitating for the public? And I think that's some of the things that we could talk about today. So with this, I'd like to give the word to Åsmund, who can take us through a little bit of the history of making gardens and sculpture parks.
Thank you, Ina. This event is something that we actually had spoken about for several years. And we hadn't really started the discussion, what kind of park are we creating together with the artists and everyone involved. So if I can have 3 or 4 minutes, just to take a little historical background. Let's start with the really great English landscape parks from the 18th century. This was a period in England after the terrible events in the 1600s. King Charles I was beheaded. There have been civil wars, religious wars, and everything. And then in 1688, they had what they called the Glorious Revolution, a non-violent revolution. And then something happened in Britain. And the parks were created at, of course, the landed gentry had huge, huge castles and areas. And what I think is interesting with that period is that all these parks were man-made. They dug out lakes, they built bridges, they had groves and hillocks and everything. Are the kind of things they put into it, because they put sculpture into it, and symbols. And for some of the great parks, like Stourhead and Stowe and Chiswick, all these elements had a classical background, and the architecture tended to be Palladian. And all these shapes came with a story and a value. And this period in British literature is called the Augustan Age, with poets like Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift. And they tried to take the work of Ovid and Horace and the great authors from antiquity in Rome to create Rome again. And of course, this developed into a more with Chinese bridges, you had pagodas and stuff like that. And I think I will take 3 periods now to make it brief. And what happened in the 19th century is that, of course, these parks have been private and a part of the lifestyle of royalty and, of course, the aristocracy, was that you had the great metropolitan public parks. You had them in Paris. They grew out, of course, King's and Queen's parks, etc. And you had Central Park in New York and Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And you had them everywhere. And these parks had a lot of these romantic, organic, serpentine shapes from the English landscape garden. But they were also open to the public, and they were filled with entertainment. Like you had park concerts, you had also busts and statuary, but they were like Garibaldi, who collected Italy, and you had Giuseppe Verdi, who's the great composer. And at the outskirts of that, you had the circus and the race course, and like entertainment arenas that were in the greenery. And both the English landscape parks and the bourgeois park of the 19th century, they had a really close relation to painters. Like the landscape painters in England that tried to create what they thought was like classical landscapes. And then, of course, you had all the great artists, impressionists and people like that. This park also has a background. And it is a little different from the parks I was talking about so far, because this park is a walking park. It is a park that people go out to enjoy nature, to breathe fresh air, and it comes out of this period with care, with health, with hygiene, what happened in architecture from the last part of the 19th century, etc., etc. And it was a huge movement throughout Europe and in America and in the USA. That was the Wandervogel in Germany, the German youth movement, come out of the cities into the landscape. And of course, there was a whole lot of ideas connected to that. And I think the first part that was really important was Fontainebleau. That was connected to the Barbizon school of painters like Corot and Theodore Rousseau and people like that. Was that it was actually created like a place that people can go from Paris, an hour with the train, to go there and enjoy themselves. So this park has a lot to do with that. And what happened at the same time when you came into the 20th century is that some of the English parks started to have like abstract modernist sculpture, like the marble reliefs of Ben Nicholson, and of course the sculpture of Henry Moore. And then we are here today. So my question is, who is the painter who can make a painting as convincing about this as like Claude Lorraine and Poussin could do about the 18th century park, and that Manet did of the French city parks? And what kind of cultural object are we creating together? Mm-hmm. What will art historians and critics in 20, 30, 40 say about this? I can imagine that you as artists have worked all over the place, in galleries and museums, and also site-specific, that you have to think a lot about what are we doing here? How will my work respond to the other artists' work? Mm-hmm. I'm really curious.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to pass this on to the artists?
I think absolutely.
It's great. We have 3 artists who are working and being connected to the park in a very different, or in each their own individual way. So maybe, I don't know, would you like to start, Pippi? Would you like to say something about your encounter with the park and coming here and working here?
So your question was what we think is necessary today.
And also how you feel about being a part of creating this park.
Yeah. In my case, I work with the subject of light and colors, and I would like to reconcile artificial light with natural light, and also make good for our screen time and the electric summing in our life to make it suddenly look poetic.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
And I learned not alone from Börre Sertre, but I learned how much the Norwegian have a very special relation with light. And I knew that theoretically, but now after have been here and talked to people, we really understood now. And we learned like that in spring when the first sun is coming, that people get wild.
It's heaven.
Yeah, and we take this capacity of excitement back to Switzerland.
Much needed.
Yeah, maybe I give over. So
Yes, yes.
different ways
of
what
course.
is needed and.
I guess it's quite a big question. You know, how do we invade nature in some ways, or how do we engage with it, and how do we? What I love, I think, when we invited to this proposition and proposals to interact with many. It's us, but other than humans as well. You know, it's the worms, it's the light that comes, that's the grass that's growing. So I think it's how that landscape evolve around us, the man-made element that we bring in, I guess, which are either with technology or marble or whatever elements. What I kind of like is that being outside there, you kind of, as an artist, you might lose control, and it has its own life. You know, like plants might crawl in, humans might climb on it, or get. And I think what you're asking is maybe what kind of paysage or landscape we're creating. It's a big one, because I think it's a very large landscape we live in at the moment, because there's so many inputs from the world. There's the screen we have, the birds that are flying. So I think it's quite individual input, I guess, the artist. But I think it's about having that. Hopefully, I think it's about sensing each other and sharing. Energy, like your piece is clearly gonna do. And I hope as artists we can create that openness and have that dialogue with the landscape. And but it's a big question. It's a good.
If I may, I felt that when you came to visit first time, which was before Christmas last year, was rather cold. I think maybe it was November.
Yeah.
I really felt that you had a huge curiosity to discover and to find out the different corners and areas of the park and how you could engage with the nature. You had questions about the birds, you had questions about, I mean, this entire hill used to be under water many years ago after the Ice Age, and the land has been rising, and of course the settlements have like moved closer and closer to the water, and you had an interest in all this because you understood that you would be in dialogue with all these layers of history, of the nature itself, and whoever else lives here, like the birds.
Yeah.
We had a dialogue about the birds.
Yeah. Who comes here?
Yeah.
Who's settled?
And one
who
of your
nests
proposals
here?
now is actually a bird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nesting. Happy to be here, but I think we did a lot around migration when we had the show at the new museum as well, which was new National Museum. Yeah, I think it's. It's stunning. So it's nature. I mean, that dialogue between nature and art is just wonderful to be able to think about that. Get out of the institution. No, you think differently.
And you, as Pippi, have suggested artworks that people can actually walk into and be inside of, just like with the hip lights, we walk through the forest and it follows us, or we follow it. And then with the beautiful Nordic pixel forest, we're inside your video. It becomes like an immersive work. And then for Thomas, we have a very different situation because he's more in the tradition of classical sculpture, something you walk around, but still is very, very contemporary, and it's a person of today.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I was just listening to what was being said and thinking about this idea of how light operates here. You know, if you go in an institution, you're inside a building, you're inside a gallery. As a sculptor particularly, you're going to want to control the modelling of that light. You know, if you look in Lantari, who did his lectures at the Royal College of Art, he talked about modelling in light and all this kind of thing. And I think that's what we often want to do as sculptors. And so when you're taken outside, that control is removed from you, and that level of uncertainty comes in, and that energy shifts. And so for me, the really beautiful thing about public sculpture, or should we say sculpture outside, is that playfulness and the unknowing element. So it changes the interactions and the expectations that an audience has with a particular work. And I've had works that have been inside, and I've had the same work outside, and I can assure you the interaction with that work is utterly different. And that comes from, I believe, the viewer's sense of their power in that moment and their agency in that moment to experience and express the curiosity in a way which they wouldn't do inside, as you said, the institution. Even if artists are acting differently inside an institution, I think viewers are certainly going to act differently inside the institution.
It's like you're entering an image. You walk in the image. You know, it's like you're entering the pixels. You are the protagonist. You are the main character. No, it's
there's a freedom.
You're in the landscape. You are the image. That's kind of incredible. Yeah, freedom and control, and losing some kind of control as well.
But it's the expectations attached to those locations, perhaps. So you're inside an institution, you behave. There's rules. There's normally rules on the wall. You come to a sculpture park, for example, and it's about play. The undulations of the landscape, which were man-made, they were done in order to create a certain impact on the viewer, on the, I want to say something different than viewer, the participant. And so I think these psychological elements come together in a very particular way with sculpture parks to accentuate the objects, the sculptures, the installations, in a way that's very hard to replicate inside.
You, Sam, you have both. You have the institution, you have the museum where visitors go inside, and then you have that beautiful park outside where you give that open air possibility museum to both artists and the public. How do you work differently with it, or?
Well, we have inside and outside, but what we don't have is Ekebergparken. What we don't have is the Oslo Fjord, which at one point will get sea access. At the moment, we don't have. We have things in common here, but also things which are different. The founder of our museum, and that continues today, was skeptical of sculpture parks. And one of the reasons was there are certain sculpture parks, not this one, which look a bit like graveyards. You know, like you have a bit like one sculpture next to the other, and also some which don't really fit so well. And the artist didn't have a saying in that. And one of the things I like here is very much is that you have a playfulness. You choose your path. You spoke about agency. You choose your path. It feels like you are discovering yourself, and you decide where you want to go, where you don't want to go. Obviously, a museum experience is different. It's a very curated experience. Our park is not as large as that one, so it's also kind of the pathways lead you to certain sculptures, but we try to work with artists. At least the living artists, there's also some sculptures like Alexander Calder, we can't ask him anymore, but with living artists, we let them choose the place, and we have a dialogue about how they envision the work where they like to be close to and where they don't, and we'll add another park in the future, also an old park, and there all the works are actually placed with the artists. So I think it's essential to have public art, because not everyone has the privilege to go to an art museum.
No.
And sometimes the art has also to go to the people. And maybe if the art goes to the people, then the people also will come more often to art.
Yeah.
And I am an example of that myself. Like, I came to art, my parents didn't go to museums, but I was playing football in a public park, and all of a sudden there were the sculptures, and they really annoyed us because it was more difficult to play football. Yeah. But by the end of the summer, I got really curious about these things standing there. And it was really an epiphany for me, and the main reason that I became an art lover and went to study art. And I think public art is a really good thing, and parks are an important thing for society, and if you manage it well, as you do, the two of them together are excellent. We should have art in public parks. We should also have art in ports, in railway stations, in schools. We should have them in hospitals.
Yes.
We should have them in stadiums. We should have them in nightclubs, and we should maybe even have them in graveyards, if we hope for a good afterlife.
No, totally. It makes sense, and I totally agree. And one of the things that we've seen here, as we also started an educational program for schools, kids, young, slightly older, and old people, everyone. And the meeting with the art, as you say, it's the first encounter for a lot of people when they come to the park. And some of them have never experienced art before, and they come here and they have all this diversity now. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts for us, is that the artists that have been here have really wanted to participate in this development for the public, because that's who we do it for. And I think that you have seen now, Pippi, when you've been here for all these weeks, I mean, your installation is like a magnet. People come from all directions, and they just sucked into this area where you work, where you create this magic. And they have tons of questions, don't they?
Yeah. Many families, but tons of joggers. They then can take a color shower.
Yes, perfect.
Speed art.
Speed art, yeah.
No, but I completely agree also what Thomas said, that in the public there is this need that you should know more, or that you not belong is much less obstacle. And that is like super what you do here, how the people then, they come and ask, and from a moment we had to make a robe because we couldn't work anymore.
Yeah.
But that's really, the people feel that's our work now.
Yeah.
So already
they feel an ownership.
That made us happy that we could see that. And it has different light intensities, just if I can use the moment.
Please.
So it has according to the sunrise and sunset, in the evening it's much less bright, and then has different in the day, and that it's with a Steuerung, was heißt das? Control, yeah. And you will see my team too, Kaori, the designer. Can you jump up, please?
I think she's already up there.
Okay, she's already, because we're preparing for the opening. But then also is also Dani, my video collaborator. She went already, so she knows all the sunsets of Norway by heart.
And this is a very new situation. In all, you only had one set of lights to relate to, and here you have all these surprises with the fog coming in and the sun going up and down. And
And thank you for your crazy idea to bring it here. And we learned so much how the light and the daylight and how we have to behave and how different it's perceived by the audience.
Yeah, and really like Thomas was talking about as well, and Sam with the inside in a museum, everything is sort of controlled, and you have your guards and whatever. And here, we give this gift to the city, and we just trust the audience to look after it and help us preserve it and protect it. Of course, we have people touching sculptures and stuff, and I think that's great that we can actually give them the opportunity to feel all the different materials and stuff. But this is, we're very excited about these 400 strands and the 3,600 pixels. And how many? 27,000 LED lights or something?
It's 3,600, but each has 4 LEDs in it. So, and then always 2 shells and low voltage. Soll ich das noch sagen vom Anfang, wie die Idee war? Das wäre jetzt. Okay. Maybe I quickly, one sentence how I came to the idea.
Please.
Was I was having VR goggles on, and then after a while I took them down and I said, great room, super, 3-dimensional feeling, but I felt so alone. I was inside these goggles and was so isolated, and then there was Kaori, and I asked her, can we not do a work where we walk together between the pixels, so as if we would walk together into a screen. And then she said, yeah, let's try. And that was, and now when you see it from one side or the other, you see a whole picture in it. And so every pixel knows exactly in the room, in the 3D room, where it is. And then we worked on the video that it fits to the music. Also, Serafine, who plays the piano, is here too. So, sorry, I have to say that. And
because that was also a discussion that we had developing the work. Because the first time I saw it in Arles, it had music. And then I saw it at Louisiana, and it had music. And then we started talking about, should we have music outside in the nature, or is it going to be too imposing and annoying for people? And we had a little bit of a discussion back and forth, and then inspired by how you actually do it at the Beyeler, because you have that beautiful room where you have the 7-meter-long, gorgeous water lilies by Monet, and then you have the window, and you have the water lilies outside, and you used to have a white sofa there. And you played Debussy from like 12 to 12:30 or something, and it was magical. So you would time it, so you could say, okay, fine, you can come and experience at this. And then we wondered if we should do that, if we should have music a little bit of the time. But now, the gorgeous music, I think it just has to be on all the time, because it harmonizes so well with the piece itself and the nature.
Yeah, I'm glad that you made me overcome that fear. I always said public art with sound is not possible. It's too annoying, it's too authoritarian. But the forest swallows the sound extremely fast, and we did avoid bass.
Exactly.
So the bass with the long waves would travel all over, and so so that helped, and now I changed my mind. No, or you tell me then later if it's possible.
Maybe the birds start responding, no? They start singing differently. They learn new songs. Maybe good, no? For nature to evolve.
Yeah.
We see.
We have that beautiful piece by Sarah C., which is actually bird trace. And at the beginning, there were no birds. And she said, don't worry, they're going to come after a while. They just need to get used to it.
Yeah.
And now they're there.
And now they're there all the time.
Yeah.
And they nest inside.
Yes.
Yeah. That's cool. That's so beautiful. Yeah.
But with your works, Laure, do you ever incorporate, like, you have your videos, but do you do also musical things?
I work a lot with sound. Yeah, sound is. I think for me, sound is I guess like Pipilotti Rist, maybe it has. I think it's the guts a bit. So it's subconscious a bit. I think you might not click it's there as a visitor, and I think it's another layer that sort of belongs to the work, but is less palpable, obviously. But it's something, I love sound, for sure. But it depends. Sometimes there's, quite a lot of the exhibition have sound elements, for sure. It's finding the moments where actually there's also silence that sort of, it's rhythm, isn't it? Having space to hear the sound and to, but yeah, I think in the park it's amazing. It's brave to explore that, and I can't wait to hear. It's going to be very special. Yeah, but it's also difficult with sound sometimes to give the focus, isn't it? I think if you just do a sound piece, it's hard for. Either you're in a total darkness, or it's quite hard to listen sometimes. You need the pause, no? Mm-hmm. It's very, so I think it's about sensing, it's giving a structure for it. I think it needs, Do you work with sound?
I do, actually, yeah.
Good.
I'm actually working on a sound piece at the moment.
Yeah,
in fact, before I started studying art, the thing that, when I was a student, before I did my foundation course in art, I visited the show at the Hayward Gallery, Sonic Boom, in 1999. Mm-hmm. And it changed the way that I thought about art and about what physical was. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when you think about sound, depending on how the levels are done with the microphone, the sound is going to hit you differently, it's going to resonate, and it connects us invisibly. Mm-hmm. And so as someone who's primarily identifies as a sculptor, mm-hmm. I think sound is incredibly sculptural, mm-hmm. because it activates the space that we're mm-hmm. in, and it activates us within that space, so we become one with that space. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea of nature and the different frequencies that are in play with one another in nature, we have evolved to understand it on a level which is, as you say, like unconscious. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then that, again, talk about play and being in nature, the idea of being brought into awareness of that unconscious sensibility that we have as mm-hmm. human beings about sound, and being able to pinpoint elements of it, mm-hmm. and becoming appreciative of a bird call mm-hmm. in a way that one might not have been otherwise. Mm. So I think that's also the power of a sculpture park in mm-hmm. terms of the different context, the mm-hmm. environment, and sound itself interplays so well with the physical elements within that. So mm-hmm. it's a really, I love sound as an object.
It connects, isn't it? It's like the waves, it touch everything.
Absolutely.
In some ways without touching. I mean, that's quite
I think there are some continuities throughout the 2.5 centuries that I gave a brief discussion of. And one thing with your work, Pipilotti, is that it is festivity, that is something that is actually very energetic. And you do not expect to find it in a forest. And I think that in this park, that you are taken by surprise. There is a certain sense of serendipity that I think is quite important when it comes to art. One thing is to take down the threshold so that people do not feel afraid or estranged in the meeting with art, but also that you can find it by surprise.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I think that's a really, really good point. It takes me back to the first sculpture I showed outdoors mm-hmm. in 2013. It's not that long ago. Mm-hmm. And it was in Yorkshire, in the Yorkshire Sculptor Park. Oh. And it was a piece that I had shown. It was a man with a mobile phone, believe it or not.
It was a what?
Yeah, sorry? It was a man. It was a young man. So it was a young fiction. So people probably don't know. I create fictional characters based around ideas of historical sculpture, statues, monuments. So they're in the same vein, but they are fictional. So they sort of undermine the expectations of who gets to be represented. So, and they're often they're mainly of black people, mm-hmm. Which has existed in only a very limited form within sculpture. And so showing this indoors in London, in an urban environment, people went in and they saw it as a sculpture in a gallery and they went, oh yeah, nice, okay, great. It goes to the undulating, manicured countryside in Yorkshire, and it's within nature. And it absolutely changed the context because the expectation for who and what gets to be in that space is utterly different. And so it amplified the impact in a way that I really hope happens here. And I feel like that's something, that's one of the qualities again that, this as you talk about this, the serendipity, the great discovery, is such a powerful element within the open air and how we can show works in these places like this. Yeah.
There's also another thing I feel that actually is happening in this park, is that, of course, there are people behind this, and we have this group that discusses this, and you have the municipality and everything, but each of the artists are totally free to shape your own content and form, whereas the old parks were like one great architect, one that was really the managing director of the whole thing. So I think that is very, very different with what we are creating here.
I'm curious, you said totally free. I'm curious to hear how free artists actually are.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, public art is a paradox. Everyone says they like it, and then when you want to do it, everyone comes with restrictions, conditions, laws, and at the end you say yes, but actually you mean no. And I feel the freedom of artists is shrinking a lot, and the responsibility is growing a lot in the same time for artists to public artworks. And many of the laws that apply in the public space have been created long before contemporary art was created. So they were not made with contemporary art in mind, and the artist somehow, we have to navigate somehow through it. And as a curator, you have to become a bit like Robin Hood, First of all, like make a very far shot, because it's not going to happen immediately. Sometimes hide in the woods. Try to get the love of a powerful lady. That is always helpful. You have to also, you have to break the law for the public good sometimes, and of course take the money from the rich and give the art to the poor. But I would be curious to hear from the perspective of the artist, how is it now to be, like, how much freedom does one have in a public space?
So the whole process was 5 years. But also there was COVID in between. And the political constraints were more on your shoulder. There was all the meetings with the environmentalists, so the question about insects. So it was a lot of constraints, but in general fast forward just 5 years. And then mainly the other constraint gave us even almost more work was all the physical constraints. That it has to be waterproof, snowproof, the whole construction has to hold the snow. All these things were even more challenging.
Yeah, we had quite a process, because as a public park owned by the city of Oslo, we deal with cultural heritage. There's quite a lot of cultural heritage in the ground. So we have restrictions where we can actually put in artwork. And then, of course, you have the people dealing with nature. So there will be a plant, a flower, a tree, whatever that you can't get too close to, or roots of trees or whatever, all that stuff. With Pipilotti, when she came to the park the first time, we'd been sort of scouting, and we found this area. And that was, in my opinion, and I think we shared the opinion, that it was a beautiful pocket in the forest where we really wanted to do it. And I knew that there was a lot of cultural heritage in the ground, so it would be difficult. But then luckily it was going to hang in the trees, so maybe that would be easier. And then everything was moving forward and we had the permissions. And then someone came and said, it's a light work, and is it going to be on 24/7? Then you're going to change the environment for everyone who lives here. So that's why she mentions the insects, because all insects and birds, they also have a routine like us. We sleep and whatever, we're awake, it's night and day, and it's the same for them. So then we were almost shut down because of the insects. And then we had to have a conversation with Pipilotti and with the city and with the people who looks after the nature. Thank God they're there and reminds us of all this. And then we found out, okay, we don't have to have it on 24/7. So we turn it on in the morning, we turn it off in the evening, and the insects and everyone else can go to sleep.
So we turn it off at 11 o'clock in the night.
Yep.
And then there are all the street lights all everywhere. So we could also, it's not as bright as the street lights, and the rest light we make not a bluish, it has a more reddish tone, and that's better for the insects.
So insects in Oslo don't like nightlife.
Apparently not.
They're not party animals.
Maybe we should introduce them to it. They might change their mind.
But your team was very considerate also that, for example, doing the net up, then the floor had to rest again and wait a month to do the next step. So these became just normal things in the process.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of compromises. But I think that one of the things that we really learned is that when the city of Oslo said yes to doing this project, everyone agreed that we will do it. It's a great idea, and we're very much welcoming it. So everyone is always very constructive, trying to find solutions. And I would say we have the best collaboration with the city of Oslo. And they're really helpful, and they use all their skills, all their knowledge to help and guide us. So that's also going to be the case when, I think that for Thomas, we sort of have an idea where to place the sculpture, maybe at the beginning, the entrance of the park, because we would like to have her communicate with the audience as soon as they sort of approach the park. For Laure, we have looked at another few places, and we will have to collaborate with the city again to make sure that we don't interfere with something that shouldn't be interfered with. But I think that's also one of the beauties.
Yeah, it feels like here it's a lot about feeling empathy, you know, with the space, with the elements. So it's the constraint having empathy with the ground, with the different materials, and but it's very different to a sculpture. So far the constraints felt really more about us. Feeling the earth here, feeling the place, I think, and that takes longer, I guess, because you need to understand and hear and melt and freeze and have all this the snow and. But it's if you work in an airport, there's very different constraints. It's all about security. Shows as well. There's a lot of security that are curating our shows. So it's. And I'm sure there's some element of security that we need to take into account, as you can't be too dangerous, I guess. And but it's you guess it's something that has to come in the work quite early on. It's true. It's a longer process, I think, than maybe in the past there was like this vision, and I do that, and I don't know. I wonder. I don't know.
I think that idea of empathy is very interesting, and I think when you work within the boundaries of people who care, everything is possible.
Yeah.
Everything is possible. There's not an issue. You get to focus on the work, focus on the connection to the audience. But working in public realm, it also brings you into contact with people who have no empathy.
Yes.
They don't have a care. Their job is about zoning. Their job is about what objects at what size can go where. They have to liaise with the other person who's in control with the boundary next to them, or sometimes slightly overlapping them, and they get to argue over that all the time. And So it really depends in terms of the artist's experience on who you're working with and who has your back. And I think, you know, what you were talking about in terms of you need people with power behind you. It's very, very, very difficult to make work in the public realm without that support.
Yeah, yes, true.
And that's, I think, one of the toughest elements to making public work.
And an invitation.
Invitation, you know? At the very least, you need an invitation.
Yeah.
If you don't have invitation, they're going to call it guerrilla this, that, and the other.
I want to do this.
Yeah, you know, just hammer it into the ground. You know, I've done a lot of different works in different countries, and at this point, and you know, the level of support has been varied. But without that support, we get there in the end. But without that support, it does not happen, because it only takes one real objection to stop something. So I think, in terms of, you know, when the work does arrive, and even if it's the work before yours that existed, it's the level of impact that work has had that sets the tone for what you are then able to do, or, you know, or the ease at which you'll experience making your own piece. So I think, you know, that's why I think there's a responsibility that artists also have in terms of the quality and the integrity that they bring to each project.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, so, you know, somewhere like this, which actually highlights and exemplifies that, is incredibly important, because it makes it easier for the next people coming through to try and express their ideas.
Yeah, that's very true. Should we?
I have a question for you. How do you deal with the fact that artworks, you know, everyone seems to pretend art, you know, ars longa vita brevis, art goes beyond our lifetime, but we now know that, you know, a lot of art that is put in the public space is a very precious resource, as is public attention. Do you think artworks have an expiry date, that you think at one point they should be exchanged, or in your conversations with artists, do you already say, okay, this project is going to last 5 years, 10 years, or do you leave it open and wait until the people take it down with a demonstration?
Yeah, it happens.
I think that so far, every work that we placed out, we had the ambition and the plan that it was going to be permanent. So the foundation has an agreement with the city of Oslo for 50 years. And what happens after 50 years, we will find out. But that is the intention and that is the plan. And then, of course, every artwork is different. Some of the bronze sculptures, we know they're from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and they can live outside for a long time. And then we've had quite a few projects that are slightly different in character, like the Tony Oslo cave with the screens and the films and whatever. We didn't know how long it was going to last because of the winter and the cold and the humidity and everything. And with Pippi, we've also been discussing this, and also because what she's made before, the Pixel Forest, is the work for indoor. And now we had to work with that fantastic team that she has and inventing new fabrics and new technologies to have it outside. And we do, of course, hope that it's going to live for eternity because it's so mesmerizing, beautiful, and wonderful. But we will see. But I think that the whole team has done a wonderful job. So I believe that it's going to last for a long time. But, of course, you have to keep that in mind. I mean, if a work stops to work, or if it doesn't look good, it's not beneficial for the artist or anyone, then, of course, you have to reconsider. So I don't think that you can be too firm on it. And then we've had like a few pieces that we placed in the park, and we found out that maybe it wasn't the best position for it. So maybe we have to move it. So we've done that with a few sculptures. It's less easy with the site-specific works, like the James Stroll would be difficult to move, and Pippi's now. But some of the other works we've been able to move because they could have a better placement. So dynamic, I think. It has to be dynamic.
But don't you think that the very basis for public art is that it communicates? So there must be some common ground between what the artist is expressing and what the audience has a chance to communicate with. And what I said in my initial speech is that how will this park with all the artworks in it, how will that look as a representation of values in our society, in our time. And if that will make sense in 2 or 3 generations, then I think they will take care of it. Then it becomes more or less like a museum, that a protected sculpture park as a museum. But that we do not know. But I think that that interrelation, that the ways communicate something that public can relate to. You are very concerned about that in your work.
Yeah. You put me on the spot now, haven't you? I am concerned about that. And I feel that's what my work was responding to, was work which I think had passed its expiry date, or which hadn't been kept, it came down to education. We, as global publics, had not been kept up to date with the histories of the monuments that were existing within us, in our societies, that we would either ignore or take and absorb into our lives and take as normal and as everyday and as acceptable. We didn't challenge anything about them because they came to represent power visually. The people atop those horses, on those plimps, they represent power. It's the hard-wiring shortcut to our very understanding of how we react to certain types of people. Other shortcuts to reactions would also be created within the media. The way that different traits are talked about, different types of people are talked about, that's a shortcut to, we know what that person will be like, but based on the way they look. So if somebody comes along to challenge that within the same framework as the objects that we're supposed to revere and the things that we understand, but shifts it slightly so that it's almost the same but different, you would think that people would be open to that challenge. Whereas I had a lot of pushback from people who had felt very protective of that format, felt very protective of the monuments, felt that they didn't know the history of that individual, but they knew they had to protect his right to be on that plinth, and for that horse to rear, and for that conquering gaze to go across, and for the stance to exist. So I've tried to shift that through different body language, through fictional characters, through different types of clothing, but in a way which related itself to a very current and ongoing history. Can I have current history? Yeah, you can. A history, an ongoing history of representation, of inclusion, or the feelings that we all have as human beings. We all want to be recognized, we all want to be seen, and we want to feel understood. Whereas that's only given to certain people to the certain extent. So there's a kind of a microcosm within this imbalance that we can feel as individuals, but it's played out on a very social scale. And I felt it was my responsibility, because it was my lived experience, it was my life. It was my experience, my responsibility to try to bring that to an audience. And it so happened that looking at the public realm and then placing works within the public realm, as well as inside galleries, because I want to challenge both spaces, turned out to be the most effective and powerful way of doing that. And people control their space. I can't remember who said it, but you see a work here, and you take that walk to work every day. That's your space. So what's this thing doing here? You feel emboldened to talk about that thing. So if you take a format that you recognize every day and change it, why is that changed? Now, if you do that in the space that you also feel emboldened with, it magnifies the likelihood that person's going to challenge what's there. And that's what I wanted to do, bring people to the questioning of what exists within our societies already.
But that is the dialectics of it. When you take away the plinth, then of course people know that this is a meaningful move. It's a negation that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just leave it there, Yeah, absolutely.
Should we open up to you guys, maybe? Is there anyone?
I have a question for Pipilotti. Pipilotti, how long is your film here? It's a film, no, you've made?
Yes.
It's 25 minutes in loop and 4 different sound pieces.
But it's also 10 years, no? You've planned it. You've planned the light for 10 years to run, no?
No,
It's good PR. But 10 years, absolutely.
From the material,
we
tried to do that it's UV resistant, but we cannot prove it unless we...
But you worked with the light for the whole year, no? Or is the light controlled the winter, yeah.
So in winter, 7 o'clock in the morning, there will still play, the night file will play.
Okay.
And in summer, when it's 7 o'clock, you're already full in the day.
Yeah.
So.
But the sequence is 24 minutes. That is looping and changing slowly during the day, and during the months, and during the years.
Yep.
Wow. Is there a story? Is there a narrative to the film?
In the film?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's bad.
Yeah, it has a dramaturgy, but not a concrete story, it's abstract story. You walk in the brain of the other human.
Yeah.
That is...
It's more about the pixels.
As you said, how we are as human, culture is always a wish to overcome your loneliness and to understand the other, or to show what you see and to see what the others see. And so that's my hope, that everyone will have a complete different experience.
And now that you've done all the hard work, technically speaking, do you think technically you've done all the technical challenges, so you know the materials, you've found a way to make it exist outdoors?
Yeah.
Do you think this cloud will move to other places and exist in other countries or in other cities, or do you feel it's somewhere that this is the only place, or do you feel like it could live elsewhere? Have I touched a sensitive subject? Is it not supposed to? I just feel like these are, it looks like it's going to be an absolutely incredible experience, and I wonder if that's something that you've already...
I think it's Oslo. So they gave me the possibility to do it, and then we cut the navel cord, we cut the cable, we go back to Switzerland, and it's own child, or it's yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are so grateful and so full of joy, and everyone who's been there.
But maybe we should not put the expectations so high now.
You know what? I've done that with another few people, and they just said you could have even gone further. But should we open? Is there anyone who would like to ask our fantastic panel any questions? Do you have any thoughts, any concerns? No? We have a microphone that we could send around if anyone has anything they would like to share or ask. Then I think maybe we should say thank you to everyone for being here and participating. There is a little bit of snacks and some drinks, and we can hang out in the tent for a little while, and then, let's see, we are 17:27, so in about 20 minutes, half an hour, we could start moving up into the forest, and then we will get closer to the moment. But thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for being here with us this evening.